to welcome you all to this presidential panel. I'll let the dignitaries take their seats. President Tinubu and President Oligi Nguema, thank you very much indeed. Yes, you may sit down, please. It's wonderful to be with all of you, and we have two presidents today. Just saying hello to President Kagame. Lovely to be in your beautiful country yet again. So we're going to have two languages, French and English. For those of you who want to hear French translated into English, put your, hi Louise, put your headphones on, number one, and vice versa for number two. So President Tinubu, you may wish to use that when your fellow head of state speaks in French. So you can see what the topic is. It's the sovereign test. Can Africa turn continental alliances into assets, strategic assets? I don't know if some of you, when you arrived in Kigali, saw the Sustainable Development Goals. Did you see those written on the walls, 1 to 17, what they are? But you know what? Africa has a $1.6 trillion financing gap for the SDGs. So there's a huge mountain to climb. And we're going to be exploring different ways of how we can actually achieve that. Because we've had plenty of declarations, plenty of policy statements, plenty of initiatives and projects and so on. I've been around so long that I've been through all of them, NEPAD and the Abuja declarations and the Maputo and all the rest of it. So it's not that Africa lacks vision or ambition, but it is lacking in establishing some kind of continental framework that identifies what the priorities are, indeed to turn these alliances into strategic assets. It's what President Kagame has said of Africa. He said it of the African Union, but actually it's relevant that Africa suffers from a crisis of implementation. So that's what we want to discuss with our two presidents, is how can we have those cross-border investments, those cross-border regulatory frameworks, tax harmonization, cross-border payments, corporate equity, sharing corporate equity, just de-risking public-private partnerships, you know the whole thing of what we need to do to really get Africa to pull together as one. I think what the Strait of Hormuz crisis has taught all of Africa, just as indeed the COVID crisis did and crises in the past, is nobody's going to do it for Africa. No country in history has been developed by outsiders. It has to mobilize its domestic resources, increase its tax to GDP ratio, 16%, one of the lowest in the world, increase its intra-African trade, 18% compared to, say, 64% in Asia, 67% in Europe. You all know the statistics. So we've got to get Africa moving, looking at itself, and that's what we're going to be talking about. So, President Tinubu, I'll start with you. How can we expect African countries at this critical time when they're under so much pressure, inflationary pressures, the energy crisis and so on, as a result of the Strait of Hormuz conflict, to think regionally or to think in a continent-wide way? They're going to be thinking about their own national priorities, their own people. How can you persuade them to have more of an outward vision?
Well, thank you very much. It's a great honor being here to review what is ours in Africa. How do we put resources in place, take advantage of the global energy that we have right now and the situation? It is very welcoming to see that we are up to it. And I must congratulate my brother, the president of, Wanjatu, putting this together, and congratulate all of you organizers and the participants. For me, Africa needs to put its money where his mouth is.
Would you put your microphone where your mouth is? Yeah. Thank you.
We need to put our money where our mouth is and develop a relationship. Luckily, we have African trade agreement that should not be left on the drawing board, should be activated properly. Regional collaboration and effective utilization of our resources. Not working in silos, but in collaboration with one another, using what we have. To me, I believe in Africa first, because I've started Nigeria first. And all resources, today, we don't want scavengers. We don't want extractors. We want people to add value. If you're an investor, we will encourage you to add value to what we have as a nation before that is.
I see you have given us a very effective blueprint there, which you had prepared, which is extremely useful. Thank you very much indeed. But I would like to come back to you as well on some of the issues that you've raised. But let me ask you, President Tinubu, so a country like Gabon, we know, is very dependent on oil exports. And Africa has always been the exporter of raw materials, crude oil, and then the importer of more expensive finished products. And you mentioned going up the value chain and how Nigeria is going from downstream to midstream to upstream and so on. But for a small country like Gabon, 2.6 million people, I mean, how you just can't go it alone there. You can't build a refinery. The Dangote one you mentioned cost $20 billion. So when we're talking about strategic assets that cross borders, is a refinery really one of the obvious ones that you would point at?
Oh, definitely. Today, with the crisis around the world, particularly Iran conflict, Nigeria won't be able to survive with over 200 million people in peace without a refinery. And what a risk taker like a Dangote refinery must be encouraged by the government and power. What I did, support him, give him free trade zone license, support him in the effort to source the crude that is necessary. And today he is the exporter, net exporter of both the PMS, aviation fuel, and other commodities.
Yeah, we heard that he's favouring all the African carriers, Ethiopian Airlines and so on, for the aviation fuel that's in great demand. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
But he's producing 650,000 barrels per day, which is only enough for 70% of Nigeria's needs. So he's still a little bit away from being able to export refined oil, petrol to his neighbours.
Yes. And it's been supported. My own formula is, like I said, put your money where your mouth is. When they're about to start a crisis, say, okay, what is the denominated currency in Nigeria? That is Naira. I have crude that you expect me to export in dollar. So I give you, as my local refinery, I give you crude in Naira. No letter of credit, no bank scrambling, and exchange rate instability.
Solve the problem. You meant, the cross-border payments, which means, African countries don't have to convert to USD and so on. So that, very good, the cross-border payments and so on. But just very quickly as an aside, I mean, I think it was you or maybe President Oligi Nguema, who mentioned monetary union and how the euro has got the euro. So if Europe's got the euro, when will Africa get the afro?
Nigeria, I'll say, and speaking for Africa, as African champion, putting our spirit behind what we talk about is creating a platform. Look around the entire continent, 54 countries. There's none of us without a particular commodity available in the country or the other. Why not start an exchange commodity platform where we can trade with one another?
Well, why don't you start one?
You say?
Why don't you start the commodity exchange you're talking about? You're the most numerous country, biggest economy, or South Africa, you know, the two of you battle it out at times, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. But in terms of moving up the value chain, that is something that requires investment. So if I could talk to you first about money, really, because there is a lot of African money. I mean, we've got $2 trillion held in institutional capital from the pension funds and so on and so forth in Africa. But a lot of it goes out of the continent to safer assets in Europe and so on. And the irony is, of course, Africa then has to pay off its debt at much higher interest using foreign money. But there we go, that's another matter. So how can you get that indigenous finance working for Africa? How can governments play a role in de-risking for the private sector? Because if capital was a person, it would be a coward and very, very impatient. They don't want to wait a long time for their returns, and Africa needs patience.
Well, I agree with you. Investment is very cowardly unless you are transparent, accountable, and forthright. And part of that element is Africa looking at itself, making sure that we can put these resources together and go out there and negotiate for ourselves. To me, I wrote an article on, in the Financial Times talking about international rating agencies. What do they know about Rwanda? Have they visited Rwanda and seen the potential tourism of this country?
And its growth last year of 9.4%.
9.4%. And if you don't leverage that one in value creation, how can Rwanda benefit?
Well, why don't you get your own African credit rating agency? Because the big American three, Fitch, S&P, and Moody's, they dominate 95% of the market.
We're doing that. That is why we recapitalize all our financial institutions.
Because they give Africa consistently low ratings.
You have to help yourself. Now, no one can take metal out of Nigeria without adding value. No one. Gone are the days where you can excavate the dust, all the minerals, and go. No. I can produce battery for cars with my metals. Rare earth mineral is valuable. But if a Mobil, a Total, a Shell, we value what is on the ground as a balance sheet item capable of funding and raising capital that is necessary for the exploration and production of my resources.
Yeah.
Why not do it for me too?
But you know, and I'll put this to both of you, So the private sector obviously has a role to play. You know, it will bring in its capital and it will bring in its plans and its workers and so on. But it requires governments to play their part in Africa. Capital is also, we said it's a coward, it wants stability. And so it's for African countries and also, you know, in a cross-border way to provide the regulatory frameworks, the strong legal frameworks that capital needs to feel secure in order to flourish. And that is the role of governments. You've got to provide that policy framework for the private sector to say, fine, we'll partner with you. You've also got to de-risk a little bit so that they come in and maybe working with those few DFIs, development finance institutions. So you have, you know, we all know the instruments of blended finance. So government has a role to play. And sometimes, sadly, they don't, do they?
I'm already playing that.
But we're talking continent-wide here.
Removing all the bottlenecks, giving you necessary incentives for direct foreign investment into the country. This year alone, I can beat my chest that Nigeria is attracting close to $20 billion foreign direct investment. It's because unwind the bottlenecks, be efficient, be transparent, be open. There's no intellectual capacity that is deniable by the rest of the world.
Okay, environment. But there are other things that governments can do to mobilize their domestic resources. And as I said, the tax to GDP ratio in Africa is the lowest in the world at 16%. When you were governor of Lagos, you put a lot of work into doing something there with the local taxes, didn't you? But it's still pitifully low all over Africa.
But today, Lagos State is the 5th largest economy in Africa.
But looking at the I mean, yes, or I'll let you brag about Lagos and Nigeria, but you were chair of ECOWAS.
I'm very proud of the legacy I left behind there.
Okay, all right.
I'm still monitoring that.
You talked about beating your chest, President Tinubu. You've done plenty of that, but you were chair of ECOWAS until last year. So just looking at the region, West Africa, but also the continent as a whole, when we're talking about, you know, mobilizing domestic resources, people don't trust governments. The informal economy is very high, so it makes it much harder to get taxation for the public purse.
Tax reform will have to be written in English language, understandable, and not Japanese in English. A standard that everyone will be able to pay, not for the avoidance, but genuineness of citizenship, right commitment to pay taxes. Write it simple but not stupid. I've reformed that in Nigeria. You can pay your taxes from your telephone. You can assess yourself and you can evaluate yourself so easily from your telephone. It is. What Africa needs is to also put funding in place for research and development. This research and development will get our youths going. They are highly intellectually inquisitive. They will do it. Believe in them.
Yeah, but the budget doesn't go there, does it, into science and R&D? Is it 2%, I think, of African countries' GDP should be paid? Yeah, very low indeed. Okay, so we've talked about getting, you know, critical minerals from mining to manufacturing, how important that is to go up the value chain. Domestic resource mobilization, you've got a job in trying to encourage domestic banks actually also to invest in Africa. But just looking at these big scalable projects that, you know, reflect cross-border shared interest. Agriculture, obviously, still the biggest employer in Africa, but largely made up of these smallholder farmers. And so when domestic money, domestic banks in Africa are looking for bankable projects, they don't see them in agriculture. Figures say that only between 10 to 20% of smallholder farmers in Africa are commercially viable. Is it time to bite the bullet in a country like Nigeria and just say 8% of African produce is actually refrigerated in the first mile? So infrastructure obviously is at the base of this, and I'll come to that in a moment. But should Africa start thinking about agribusiness?
Very big indeed. Africa needs to do that, particularly a nation like Nigeria, with over 900,000 kilometers of arable land. Food sovereignty is crucially important for us. Now, the government, first of all, must identify critical areas of need for those farmers. Critical is infrastructure. How do you enlarge infrastructure? How do you promote agriculture? For example, Bank of Agriculture in Nigeria, okay, then gone were the days when agriculture is no longer sexy. Bending the back and not mechanized. Today, I have over 6,000 zones of mechanization in Nigeria. And the government must identify energy sources for preservation of those items, buy back from the farmers when the prices are very low and frustrating, and have storage silos, and when the market is better, help the farmers. It's not possible for the farmers to be on subsistence farming alone and think it will be profitable. Highly yield seeding must be provided to those farmers. Now, let me give you an example. In Nigeria, the Sokoto-Badagry road that embark upon is 1,000 kilometers of road that is going to link Benin Republic and all the way to Ghana by the time we finish. When I embark on the road, I call Boa, call Dangote, you are cement producers. I'm not going to import bitumen. I'm going to use the concrete road that will last about 500 years, if it is possible.
Hold it up higher.
And that's what I did. When you see this road today, they are all concrete. I didn't have to import bitumen.
Yeah. It's shocking that the whole of Africa, the annual food import bill is $80 billion, a continent that could feed the entire world. You also mentioned electrification. I was very struck actually by Rwanda has got such a remarkable story to tell in terms of its electrification program. It was something like 8% in 2009. It's now 80% of households are actually electrified. But as the World Bank says, electrification alone is not enough unless it creates jobs and boosts economic growth. And obviously, energy poverty in Africa, we know 640 million people don't have access to electricity across the continent and so on. It's going to be a big focus for infrastructure. But before we finish, I just want to ask you about the digital revolution, because of course, internet use in Africa is extremely low. It's something like 36% compared to the global average of 74%. And so, we're going to risk having a world of digital haves and have-nots, and also between people in Africa. And so digital infrastructure, again, is something that transcends borders. So is that something that's on everybody's radar at the presidential table?
It is. And where we've embarked upon over 90,000 fiber optic lane across the country. And that is the only way we can bring lessons to children and communicate with farmers as well. And ordinary traders are in need. No, it is where we must be able to put funding together to help Africa surpass the level of primitive telecommunication program.
And bring in AI and all the rest of it. And,
oh, yes.
Yeah, and e-commerce.
We need to leapfrog.
But to leapfrog, it's not just like the mobile phone technology for the AI revolution. You need a skilled labor force, you need the digital infrastructure, the data processing and storage and data collecting and all the rest of it. And Rwanda, I think, is positioning itself as a sort of African superpower in that regard.
That is what our institutional, financial houses are for. No, guaranteed investment. These are investment that's have high yield of returns. So they should be able to do that. And a government like ours is ready to de-risk an investor, bold enough to do that. It's not luxury, but a necessity for us to be in a 21st century class of communication.
Okay. So just really, it would be remiss of me not to mention the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which sort of came into being in earnest in 2021. And it very much embodies the kind of Pan-African spirit and, domestic resource mobilization, looking at yourselves and the continent in order to prosper. But we are starting from a very low base, 18%. Of intra-African trade in Africa is intra-African. Are you optimistic?
I am.
You are?
Very optimistic. We have a very dynamic, youthful population, restless and not ready to take excuses. I'm a politician. If I don't get them ready for that, they will vote me out.
I was talking to one of the delegates here, Ebenezer Asante from MTN, and he said to me, if you get the chance to ask the president, say to them, listen, politics always gets in the way of integration, is what he said. He's right.
He's right.
Yeah. But you're the politician. You can do something about that and use your influence across the continent.
Okay. A politician is a critical member of your society. He must listen to you, respond to you, and answer to the public, can be accountable.
What would you like to hear from this CEO forum at the end of it all?
At the end of this, once again, I congratulate the organizers, all of you participants, Paul, again, being tenacious and committed to African Renaissance. And the only way that we can achieve that is to push together, be determined more at home, using our resources as the only way, as the only instrument that can elicit wealth and build an inclusive society.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, President Tinubu. Well, that ends this conversation with the presidents. It's become a bit of a cliche, hasn't it, to end with a quote from Nelson Mandela, but this is one attributed to him, which is, it always seems impossible until it is done. Thank you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure being with you. Thank you. Thank you very much. photograph. And I suppose, could I invite Makhtar Diop and Amir from the organisers to come and take a photograph with our two presidents and, of course, His Excellency President Kagame.